Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at Lokahi, formerly known as Our Audio's Lokahi, or maybe known as Audio Lokahi. I don't actually know what to call it anymore, so we're going to call it Lokahi. So the story is this is assembled by a very small team in China. They are all hand assembled, and Linsol picked it up to sell it, took 60 or so orders, and they are currently fulfilling those orders, a couple a week. So I had ordered mine directly from Taobao using a proxy service called Superbuy, and that's how I ended up getting my hands on it. But it is quite nice. It's a little on the bigger side. It's got a almost marble-ish looking shell to it, and the nozzle itself doesn't have a lip, but it's not too bad. It's got maybe a DIY look to it. There's a little glue around the base of it. But not bad. This is not the cable that comes with it. This is an XINHS hybrid, copper, pure silver, quite nice cable. The cable that actually comes with it actually is quite nice. It's a 4-core SPC, and the weirdest thing about it are these colored MMCX connectors. It almost looks like someone cut their finger and dripped some blood into my connector. I'm not sure who, maybe that's an artistic expression, but it's a bit odd. But nice cable anyway. So before we jump into it, for those of you who may be joining me for the first time, let me just kind of explain why this is a very strange set for me to talk about. And because essentially I do lots of budget reviews, more so sets under $100. And the Lokahi is a very special set because price-wise, it wasn't really out of my range, but sound quality-wise, it's going to compete with sets that are way out of my range and way out of my depth of knowledge. So, I'll do my best, and I hope you get something out of it. But if you're looking to figure out if the Lokahi is better than Claire or Monarch or 64 Audio, something that is way up there, because this one competes, not that high, but very far outside of the $200 range. I won't go into that. So I'm going to more so explain, relative to the things that I know, as opposed to trying to extend, on some knowledge that I have no idea what I'm talking about. So do take that into consideration when I say the bass is the best thing in the world. That's sort of relative to a $10 MT1 for you TRN fans. So let's actually get into it. So number one, there's a couple things that you should know about it outright before you buy it. Tips are really important on this guy. It's BA only, BA bass. If your shell slides a little bit out of your ear, you're going to lose bass response very quickly. So these are actually the KZ star tips, inverted, flipped, however you want to call it. For me, it gives you a nice wide bore opening, but you get a very wide, and this is actually a little bit sticky, so it sticks right in your ear. And for me on this set, I tried setting the ear fits. They didn't quite stay in my ear enough. KZ flip tips, perfect. And you get all the bass, it stays in place, it's a little sticky. Like I said, the first time it felt like there was a bit of suction, but I think it was just this kind of a sticky new tip, so that's that. So volume, this one works really well from lower volumes all the way up through volumes that you shouldn't be hitting. So do take that into consideration. It's a very wide range of volumes, and it sounds great across a range, which isn't all that usual, especially on some budget sets that their BA only sets tend to be lower volume, higher treble response. It's a little more painful at higher volumes. This one will go quite high. And the third thing, which is probably the more important part of the three, is it has a very up-close and personal staging or forwardness to it, however you want to describe it. It feels like the vocals are very close to your face. And I think some people are going to find that a bit annoying. Some people like to have maybe a front row experience as opposed to being an on-stage appearance, which is essentially this is. It's very close. And it's one thing to address, whether that's tips or sources or amps, however it is that you try to extend the stage a bit, I would focus on that, because it's one of those issues that you'll have to need to address if that's going to be a problem for you. Anything that will increase the depth of your stage and push the vocals back a little bit, maybe a cable from XINHS if you're a believer, do think about addressing that issue. So instruments over electronics. And I think because the Lokahi has such a strong upper range, and I'm used to budget sets, it's sort of annoying on electronics because of that intensity in the treble. And yeah, you can most definitely lower the volume a bit, but for a budget guy to hear the instruments played on this set was way more engaging and interesting than playing some of the electronic music that I normally do. It's not a huge bassy set anyway, so electronic and EDM, all that stuff sounds fine, but real instruments, nice vocals, that's what I was very much attracted to on this set. So again, like I said, BA bass is a 7 BA, no DD. You're going to get lots of extension, texture, definition, and speed. All those things, my opinion, this is the part where I say, well, I don't really go beyond budget sets, and budget BA sets especially don't really do those things all that well. They tend to have a very fast BA bass, so it sort of hits and goes, and it's got some texture to it, but typically it's a lighter, faster bass, and people tend to like that on BA sets anyway. This is not that. This is more of a BA trying to sound more like a DD. So when you pull up Hans Zimmer's 2049, it actually rumbles. And even going back to the Azul, the last set I reviewed, where the bass was there, it was very much a complement to the mids. But it was sort of the second player, whereas the bass on the Lokahi is very much a primary player. It's big and boosted. I mean, there's no mistaking that there's a lot of bass there. So, but like I said, it needs a perfect seal, and this one really tried to blur the line between BA and DD. And to some extent, I think they did that pretty well. But is it perfect compared to much more expensive sets? Not entirely sure. Sound-wise, it is a balanced U-shape. It's got this extended, boosted bass. It comes down into a flat U-shape, flat mids, and then a nice rise into a very extended treble. And there's a few peaks over there in the treble, kind of like a 3-peak mini sawtooth pattern. And you'll have to see if that's one of those things that bothers you, those specific peaks. I didn't notice it as much on this one. It's very extended. It's very forward. So, do take that into consideration. The whole sound leans from upper mids to treble in that whole range. It's got, like I said, it's got plenty of bass, but generally the focus is in that midsection to treble section. And sort of my opinion of it, it's tuned to sound good versus a technical showcase. You've got 7 BAs, and they could have made this super sharp, super detailed, super tight, super fast bass, and that's not what they did. It is very much one of these sets that people are going to say, technically wise, not the fastest bass, maybe it bleeds a little bit, it's a little slow, the layering and the imaging, all these things aren't perfect. So people are going to ding it for technicalities, but at the end of the day, you're going to say it still sounds good. So think about that. Are you one of those people who likes things to sound good, or you're very much focused on the technical performance of these 7 drivers working together in some kind of coherent fashion? So think about that. So bass-wise, I mean, it is tight and defined and swift enough. It's definitely not the fastest bass, but again, it has this almost a DD feel to it on the speed where it just doesn't, especially to BAs and the BA bass on the budget side, it's not that. It's very much trying to be a big player in the music, and so swift enough. It doesn't get muddy. It still has lots of definition, some texture, but it, when you compare it to a budget BA set, it just doesn't feel like they cut corners on that low-end BA. It sounds really, really nice to me anyway. So I do think they spent quite a bit of time getting that level of bass to be boosted, yet not overrunning the mids in any way. So drums have a very satisfying weight to them. So a song like The Cure, Love Song, the extended mix, when you hear that bass guitar right in the beginning, and then the drums come in, and then the guitars and the synths and the vocals, and all these things layer on top of one another. By the time you get to the vocals, and then you go back and listen to what the drums are doing, and they sound just as good as they did right at the beginning when you were only hearing the drums and the bass. It's really nice. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but if you listen to budget sets, it's really hard to pull off all these instruments playing at the same time, and they all sound right and good and clear. So I think that's one of these bits that the Lokahi does really good, and 7BAs in particular, it's sort of designed to do that with the speed of a BA. I think, that separation, maybe not so much the imaging of each individual instrument, but that part of that song was very different from a budget set in that respect. So the mids, mostly forward, detailed, clear over the bass, like I said, and it just sounds good. There's nothing really wrong with it, but was I blown away? Like I haven't heard bits of songs that I haven't heard before. It's not that type of experience for me. So I wasn't actually surprised. But the best part of it isn't necessarily the mids in isolation. It's how the mids work with the bass and the treble. And then you hear, a section like Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, that 111 section, when it's vocals and guitars and drums and all that playing together, and every instrument sounds sharp and clear. That's an experience that sounds better than any budget set I've heard. And that's not necessarily saying that the mids are spectacularly better. It's just the whole set taken as a whole sounds better. And it just happens to kind of come through in the mids for me that way. And then you get to David Bowie's Let's Dance. And Let's Dance is like, a party song. It's vibrant and big and tight, huge energy. And even David Bowie's vocals, quite solid. And there's been some complaints that there was some thin male vocals. Even recessed mids, I can pick out songs which sounded quite distant, despite what I said about it being too up close and personal. There are definitely some older tracks, the way it was mastered, very revealing, and it sounds quite recessed, but for the most part, that doesn't really happen. So I believe people heard thin male vocals. It's just harder to find than you would on a budget set. You could usually get a pretty good ratio when there's a problem. On this one, it's harder to find those. So like I said, the treble is going to be the most different part from a budget set. It's just based on quality and level and extension. You just don't find that at least I haven't found it on a budget set to this extent. And I think that's sort of what propels Lokahi from even beyond $200 into higher categories of sets. So how far it goes, we'll have to see how other reviews come out. But, for me, from looking at budget sets, it's very different. That level of treble, especially the quality of it, is very different. So, like I said, it is quite extended and it's very detailed and there's a lot of body in the treble, but it's really that contribution to the whole sound, which is the standout for me. And even a song that I love, Dead Mouse's Strobe, the OV version, the strings are very emotive, very strong, and then that haunting synth. But then you get to the low end kind of rumble of the horns, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, this is BA bass, and it doesn't have that, strong rumble. There's a low end there, but you're sort of reminded of that BA limitation right there. So staging, separation, imaging, again, these are things that didn't necessarily blow me away. There's width, there's height, there is some depth, but, I think from my point of view, from budget guy, that separation between instruments is actually much better than almost all budget sets. So I would say the separation imaging is very good. I think other people with more expensive sets are going to say, it's probably just average. But my point of view, it's a nice change from your typical $50 budget set. So even a song like No Better Time by Peter Alexander, you go to this 1 minute part and the strings are essentially floating over your head. It was kind of a weird height effect that you don't see too often. But there are just moments like that, moments of width and depth that not all the time. Sometimes it does feel more of an intimate stage sitting out in front of you as opposed to a big wide experience, which is not what the Lokahi is. It's I would say there's enough width, but probably not enough for most high-end sets. So that's about it. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.